Okay, this is going to be my second video in the survival slot that I'm doing about in case a disaster or weather issues or things of that nature could happen, which we know they could happen at any time. But especially with the elections coming up, God only knows. But anyway, I want to step back here and let's do some practical thinking about, let's say maybe a snowstorm happens and we're out for 5 days, maybe a hurricane, and my daughters can testify to the fact that during Katrina we were out for about 2.5 weeks, and the hurricane the year before, which wasn't as bad, we were out for almost 3 weeks of no power or nothing. And during Katrina, we were driving to Atmore, Alabama, which was, quite a ways up north just to get gasoline. And when we started running bread again, we were having to wait. It was so bad that the gas stations would open, and within an hour, they were out of gas. So we were having to drive around and wait for gas and sit in line to get gas. Okay, so that's the first thing I want you to think about is gasoline. If you have a way to store up gasoline, as far as the barrels or whatever you may think about, and if you put, what's that gas stuff you put in there? Stabilizer in there, your gas will be fine for a long time, because that stabilizer will keep it from, gas becomes hard after a long time. And when you look at gas, when it starts aging, it becomes tubes, long tubes of solid. So that's the thing is you want to keep that gas, good. If you have that, if you don't, we don't have that ability to do that. So what we do is if we heard something was coming, we'd go fill our stuff up, and I don't know what we would do after that. But that's the first thing we got to think about is practicality of gasoline. And if you have a generator, which we're fixing, we want to get a generator. They're just good anyway. For instance, we do a ministry. So if we want to go out and do a ministry out in Covington Square or something, we can take our generator, plug our PA system in there, and go. So there's a lot of applications for this stuff, not just for hoarding and storing up, but for using also. So the first thing we want to practically think about is gasoline, your cars. We want to think about generators. We want to think about all this stuff, because the first thing that's going to happen is when you lose your refrigerator, especially more than 24 hours, maybe less than that, you got to get your stuff out, because it don't take long for milk to go bad. It doesn't take long for a lot of these things just to go bad. Some thoughts of that is we live about, how far from the river do we live? About,
maybe 100 yards.
We live 100 yards from the Yellow River, which is nasty. But we could take stuff and put it in bags and go sit it in that river. And that river it's not, probably not this time of year. It'd be a little warm maybe, but when it gets cold, it would keep it cool at least. So there's things you've got to think about, stuff of that nature. Another thing I want to talk about.
If you have a well, you can put.
If you have a well, because that water stays cold all the time.
Yeah.
And you could, if you have an open well, you can actually drop it down in the well. If not, it's really not going to work.
No, you have to have an open well.
Yeah, you'd have an open well. So another thing I want to think about is medication, because there's a lot of people that have diabetes, heart problems, numerous issues out there. I know my mother and father are on prescription medicines also. So if there's a way, you should always stay ahead of your medication. In other words, especially when you get into hurricane season, which we're in now, and then when we get into the winter thing, you never know when a fluke snowstorms. If you hear something possibly coming, you need to make sure you have all your prescriptions ready. You need to have everything filled. If something else happens, you need to be thinking of long term. If the power grid goes out, or if the economy crashes, those with diabetes have some serious issues they got to deal with, and you need to start thinking long term of what you would do to survive. Because if you watch most of the survivor shows and stuff out there, that's the first thing that happens is first we forget about antibiotics. We forget about the medicines that we normally take. So if you cut yourself even on a rusty piece of metal with no antibiotics, chances are you're going to die from that infection. Some simple things to start thinking about. Honey. Honey, they found honey that's 3,000 years old in Egypt that's still good today. All they did was, it was crystallized, of course, but basically they just made it a liquid again, right? Made it into a liquid, and that honey was still good. Many people don't know that honey is a great antibiotic. If you have a cut, you can put honey on there, and it acts as an antibiotic. Garlic is a fantastic antibiotic. There's so many different antibiotics out there that you can look at. Also, you can go to pet stores and buy the generic amoxicillin types and for horses and stuff like that. And if things get bad, you can actually take that also. So that's something to think about, and so these are things that we forget about easily. Eyeglasses, if you can't see well, like One of my eyes is real strong, the other one's kind of weak. Glasses. If you wear glasses or contacts, you need to keep up with this and have plenty of them, because you don't know when you won't be able to go up to the store and get any more. So that's the application. We're about 5 minutes into this video that we need to openly think about before we get any deeper. These are just practical applications that we need to think. Medicine, gasoline, transportation, and antibiotics. And I know it's still part of medicine, but that's one of the most simple things that we forget about. And there's plenty of things. If you start Googling these things and start preparing now, which I want to stay ahead of anything anyway, in case anything happens. I do believe with this elections coming up, we could see some weird things happening. I mean, we could see some strange things. So I want to be a little bit ahead of the game, prepared for that. So this is just some basic tips, not telling anybody to go crazy and start hoarding, but these are things that we need to start thinking about. Is what if we do have another ice storm like 93?
No, it was like
anyway,
late 90s.
In the 90s, Georgia had a huge, and Alabama did too, because I remember my mom and them being without power for a long time. They had to go live in their camper, matter of fact, that they had been. So the thing is this could happen. We could have an ice storm that you could be down for a week and a half. Power lines down, stores not being able to open. You have to think about these things. And like I said, in Katrina, it was 2.5 weeks. 2.5 weeks before we got any power and stuff of that nature. So practical application, start thinking, opening your mind to suggestions, start Googling, reading. There's a lot of things. There's not a lot of food sources you can look at, but we're not getting into food today. So basic thinking, basic understanding, and thank you for watching.